During the Second World War, the German army brought technically impressive weapons to the battlefield. The Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger, with its long-barreled 88mm gun, was designed as a breakthrough tank capable of destroying Soviet T-34s or American Shermans at long range. With a 100mm thick frontal armor plate, 80mm thick sidewalls, and a mass of nearly 60 tons, the Tiger offered the firepower and protection of a heavy cruiser. Propaganda portrayed it as an invincible giant, and Allied crews initially feared it. The enthusiastic words of its designers, however, often concealed what was happening inside. Frequent film adaptations and digital recreations today can create the impression that the Tiger was a flawless machine that dominated every front without issues. But if we go back to 1942, we find a risky project born in an atmosphere of desperation. Nazi Germany still controlled Europe, but the Russian steppes and the North African deserts exposed the weaknesses of blitzkrieg. It was at this time that a requirement emerged for a tank that could intimidate the enemy, break through trenches, and stand up to Soviet behemoths. The Tiger was meant to become a symbol of the rebirth of German engineering, and a movie hero at the same time. Yet many generals doubted the sense of such a large tank and warned of looming logistical problems. In this contradictory context, the legend was born, one you're about to hear, a story not only of steel but of human suffering. In this video, you'll learn how the Tiger was created and why it became an icon despite often being unreliable. In a minute, we'll reveal how crews were selected and trained, what their daily routine looked like, and what unexpected hardships cramped compartments and confined conditions caused. As the story unfolds, we'll take a close look at the lives of the men sealed inside a steel shell, how they cared for tens of tons of complex machinery, and what psychological imprint the battles on the Eastern and Western fronts left on them. Don't expect simple answers. Almost every scene of crew life hides surprising nuances. The opening chapter will set broader frames. We won't limit ourselves to combat statistics. We'll trace how, in the offices of the Ministry of Armaments, the idea of a supertank was born, how designers addressed the problem of weight, and how manufacturers relied on the old Flak 36 artillery piece to give it a new role. We'll look into the factory shops in Kassel, where workers under Allied bombing assembled huge engines, and describe the political pressure that forced engineers to ignore testing phases. In the next part, we'll move from offices and factories to field training grounds, where future tankers took their first steps. And at the very end, we'll return to personal stories that will tell us what the word home meant to them. When German armies invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, they encountered T-34 and KV-1 tanks that could withstand rounds from standard German 50mm anti-tank guns. Hitler and the Wehrmacht command therefore ordered a heavily armored tank capable of breaching fortified lines. Development proceeded in parallel at Henschel and Porsche. Henschel's prototype was chosen for series production. The Tiger met not only a tactical need, it also became a symbol of technological advancement. Its armament was the 8.8 cm KWK-36 gun, which fired both armor-piercing and high-explosive shells. According to official tables, the tank could carry 92 rounds, but crews often packed every corner with additional ammunition to increase their chances of survival. The Maybach HL-230 engine, producing about 700 horsepower, accelerated the tank to over 35 km weight on good ground. But on the marshy fields of the Soviet Union, the Colossus sometimes sank in and got stuck. The decision to build such a heavy tank was not self-evident. In the interwar period, German designers had taken note of the French Char 2C and Soviet heavy machines, and believed the future belonged to fast medium tanks. Everything changed after the unexpected Russian surprises. Hitler personally convened a meeting at which he shouted at the developers that he needed a real breakthrough tank, a gigantic weapon that would shatter enemy morale. The subsequent competition between Porsche and Henschel became a duel of two philosophies. Porsche's elegant but mechanically unreliable model with twin electric motors and a complex transmission ultimately failed, while Henschel's robust design with a conventional gasoline engine and quality suspension won. The Tiger was conceived as a hammer against fortified positions. The idea was that it would advance at the head of shock formations, destroy anti-tank guns from afar, and open a breach for the infantry. Reality, however, proved more complicated. The theoretical superiority of the 88mm gun had to be complemented by reconnaissance, coordination, and air support. Otherwise, the Tiger could become an easy target for artillery. Crews soon realized that this armored machine was best fought smart, using terrain, camouflage, and teamwork. In the following excerpts, we'll see how this tactic evolved. The complexity of the design overloaded production capacity. Each Tiger cost over 250,000 Reichsmarks, the price of about 21 howitzers. This economic burden, together with high fuel consumption, on average 2 gallons of gasoline per mile, meaning over 150 gallons for 60 kilometers, made it a luxury Germany, in a losing war, could not truly afford. Nevertheless, in fear of defeat, Hitler chose quality over quantity. Tigers were first used near Leningrad in August 1942. Marshy ground and insufficiently tested engines led to 3 of the 4 deployed vehicles getting bogged down in the mire or breaking down. Henschel tried to improve the power plant and added winter modifications, special preheaters, and wider tracks with cast cleats to improve snow traction. Some heaters had to be removed later because they caused fires. The Tiger was often considered a sledgehammer meant for breakthroughs. The problem was that by 1942, the German army had already shifted to the defensive. The heavy breakthrough tank therefore had fewer opportunities to exploit its advantages. Instead of building more light and reliable Panzer IVs, Germany bet on technically complex weapons. This had fatal consequences for logistics and crew training. The excessive ambition of the program was obvious, and Hitler demanded delivery of the first machines by his 53rd birthday. Henschel was forced to minimize testing. They pushed forward a tank with 18 road wheels per side, a complex interleaved suspension, and a reinforced turret. But many components hadn't been adequately tested. When the first Tiger unit redeployed toward Leningrad, it had to deal constantly with cracked gearboxes and overheating engines even during transport. Some wags nicknamed them golden carts, because every breakdown cost a great deal of money and time. The problem wasn't only technical, tactical doctrine was also lacking. Initially, Tigers were to be used in separate heavy tank battalions attached to infantry armies. But infantry division commanders weren't used to working with such heavy weapons and didn't know how to leverage their advantages. Many tanks therefore spent their first months hidden in reserve positions to preserve service life. At the same time, it became clear that without strong logistical support, the Tiger became a burden, requiring special bridges, rail wagons, and repair workshops. Although the Tiger outclassed most Allied tanks, its success depended above all on the people inside. The heavy tank battalions selected their crews from the best students of tank schools. In the towns of Paderborn and Seni, candidates had to demonstrate mechanical aptitude, quick reactions, and the ability to work in a team. Emphasis was placed on discipline, precise execution of commands, and the ability to keep a cool head under fire. A specialized training center in Putlos provided intensive instruction in gunnery, ballistics, and coordination with infantry. Future tankers studied theory and practical maintenance of engine, transmission, armament, and radios. Trainees had assigned roles, but they were encouraged to master each other's tasks as well. In this way, raw recruits became cohesive teams capable of improvisation. Training on the Tiger was much more demanding than on light tanks. Candidates took courses in navigation, compass use, meteorology, and ballistics. Instructors instilled that every tank attack is a combination of fire and maneuver. Without coordination with infantry and artillery, even the largest tank has no chance. Gunners spent hours calculating aim under various weather conditions. Drivers practiced sharp changes of direction and braking on mud or ice, while loaders practiced loading by feel. Night driving, camouflage, and improvised repairs were part of the syllabus. Trainees first experienced what it meant to sleep inside a tank, smell the oil, and hear the monotonous drone of the engine above their heads. Instructors deliberately exposed them to explosions and smoke so they would get used to the stress of battle. Exercises were also conducted under time pressure. Crews had to refuel, load ammunition, reach a position, and fire the first round within minutes. The focus was on cohesion. The commander learned to work in harmony with driver and gunner. The loader trained fast hands, and the radio operator had to be ready to take the controls. Instructors rotated crews through positions, so each man knew his comrades' jobs. This rotation had practical value. If one crewman was wounded, another could immediately replace him. The curriculum emphasized standardized firing procedures. The commander spots a target through binoculars and orders the driver to halt or adjust course. The gunner estimates range and elevates the gun. The loader inserts the appropriate type of ammunition. The first shot is for ranging. The second is meant to be destructive. These drills were repeated until they became automatic, because rapid reaction in combat could mean life or death. The Tiger's complexity drove a search for innovative methods. General Heinz Guderian therefore tasked Lieutenant Josef von Glatter-Gutz with creating the illustrated Tiger Bible manual. This Bible for crews combined humorous illustrations, rhymes, and stories to help young conscripts absorb vast amounts of technical information. The booklet was not meant to be propaganda. On the contrary, its friendly tone and amusing drawings were intended to minimize study stress. The Tiger Bible clearly described the tank's components: firing procedures, tactical principles, and routine maintenance. The pictures depicted a fictional crew, each member given a name and personality so readers could identify with them. The manual even included a board game for knowledge review. During training, it was handed out so recruits could study in and out of the barracks. The Tiger Bible's unusual style was surprisingly refreshing for soldiers. Instead of dry diagrams, it featured comic strips, rhymed couplets, and cheeky innuendo meant to hold attention. At a time when many crewmen hadn't even finished primary school, this lightly ironic form proved more effective than academic lectures. In one drawing, for example, the loader runs in pajamas with a shell in his hand, and the caption urges, "Don't look at the girl, look at the round. Every shot can save a life." The manual also stressed survival rules, urging drivers to avoid sharp turns, counseling gunners to be patient, and warning everyone against smoking inside the tank because of gasoline fumes. Thanks to this, the Tiger Bible became much more than just a manual. Crews took it as a companion that stayed with them through the war. Some cut out favorite illustrations and stuck them on the tank walls to remind themselves that humor could be found even in harsh reality. As the war progressed and Germany suffered heavy losses on the Eastern Front, crew quality declined. Experienced veterans were replaced by young soldiers barely trained in basic skills. By the end of the war, Tigers were manned by boys from the Hitler Youth or older men drafted from civilian life. Short training and a lack of seasoned instructors led to maintenance and combat mistakes that damaged or lost tanks. The initial enthusiasm with which recruits entered tank schools evaporated. Commanders of the 503rd and 505th Heavy Tank Battalions recorded in their diaries that many newcomers didn't understand mechanics, didn't know basic gunnery rules, and had discipline problems. More than once, companies went into action, with tanks not fully fueled, because crews misjudged consumption. Hitler Youth lads waved ideological slogans, but their practical skills often lagged. Aging soldiers drafted from civilian jobs suffered health issues and weren't used to long hours in the cramped cabin. One commander complained he'd been assigned a 60-year-old radio operator who couldn't handle the machine gun or move quickly. Such contrasts created tension within crews. A seasoned commander had to balance youthful haste with the caution of older men. Recruitment, moreover, wasn't limited to Germans. Tiger units were also assigned recruits from occupied territories, Sudetenland, the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, or Alsace. This ethnic diversity brought language barriers. Some soldiers spoke dialects the rest of the crew didn't understand. For crews to function, they had to learn simple hand signals and words like halt, rechts, and links. In this video, you'll learn how this variance in training level showed up in crews' abilities and how much it affected their chances of survival. In a minute, we'll step into the tank's interior itself and discover what it meant to spend days and nights in a cramped, noisy, smelly environment. Although the Tiger commanded respect from the outside, only 5 men worked within. Commander, gunner, loader, driver, and radio operator, + machine gunner. The commander poked his head out of the turret hatch, surveyed the battlefield, and made decisions on maneuver and fire. In the early war years, commanders were often military veterans. They had to direct the crew's activity, judge range, and communicate with neighboring tanks via radio and flags. The Tiger provided each crewman with his own emergency hatch, improving chances of survival when hit. The commander communicated with driver and gunner over the radio or through voice tubes. To keep the crew coordinated in battle, commands had to be short and clear. Left, stop, fire. He also tracked the situation on maps, interpreted orders from higher headquarters, and depending on terrain, chose the best path. His responsibility extended much further. The commander was psychologist, father, and judge. He had to maintain morale, resolve crew conflicts, and look after physical needs like food and sleep. He often decided whether the crew would spend the night inside the tank or disperse nearby. He also had to know when to take risks and when to withdraw. A bad decision could mean the loss of the entire machine and all lives. In established units, commanders kept personal diaries of decisions, feelings, and fears, valuable sources for historians. The commander was also the link between tactical reality and propaganda. His reports were used in newsreels and shaped public perception of the front. Sometimes he was pressured to exaggerate successes and hide losses, creating additional mental strain between duty to his men and loyalty to the regime. The gunner sat on the right side of the turret and operated the gun. His task was to select the correct site and elevation, relying on the commander's cues. The loader sat to the left of the gun. Based on the designated target and the commander's order, he quickly chose the type of round: armor-piercing, high-explosive, or smoke. According to experienced tanker accounts, the Tiger carried about 98 rounds of various types. The loader had to work in very tight quarters. While loading, he scraped his hands and head on fittings and hydraulics. Otto Carius noted that the loader had the least situational awareness. He had no periscope of his own. All information came from the commander through headphones. Loading speed was critical. First shot for ranging, second to kill. The roles of gunner and loader seem straightforward at first glance, but they hide hundreds of small actions. The gunner had to constantly scan through periscopes, switch between binoculars and sight, pass information from the commander, and simultaneously feel and correct the gun's displacement as the tank moved. Every shot produced recoil that could throw the aim off axis. The gunner therefore trained muscle memory, after each shot quickly correcting elevation and sight picture. His kit also included a coaxial MG-34 to repel infantry at short range. The loader worked in a spatial labyrinth. He had to know where each type of ammunition was stored. Armor-piercing rounds were kept on racks. He rounds on the floor. Mixing them up could be fatal. He had to lift a 30-kilogram shell, insert it into the breech, close it, and shout, "Fertig!" all in seconds. In prolonged firefights, the loader sweated and his hands blistered. For safety, he had to ensure clothing didn't snag on the breech mechanism. Gunner and loader formed an inseparable tandem. In lulls, they rehearsed ammunition numbers, invented mnemonic tricks, and trained coordination together. If the loader tired or was wounded, the gunner had to load himself, significantly slowing the rate of fire. This shows how critical each individual role was to the crew's survival. The driver sat at the front of the hull, surrounded by fuel tanks, the most dangerous position. He couldn't fully stand and had only a periscope and vision block, often damaged even by non-penetrating hits. John Norris noted that although the Tiger had more internal volume than other tanks, the driver's position was the worst. Drivers had to handle throttle and clutch delicately. Rough handling overloaded the transmission and caused failures. The radio operator manned the hull-mounted MG-34 and tended the FUG-5 radio. He was also often the backup driver. Communication between tanks was vital. Crews used headsets wired together. When radios failed or the tank was in close proximity to the enemy, crews used smoke, hand signals, or even tactile tapping codes. The Tiger's driver had to master the feel of a machine weighing tens of tons. Every press of the throttle could cause a lurch that spoiled aim. The gearbox had several forward gears and one reverse. A poorly executed shift could shear gear teeth. The driver had to watch the forward periscope and the engine panel, oil temperature, RPM, and pressure at the same time. Branches, mud, and mines complicated matters in the field. He often had to reverse without seeing behind, relying only on the commander's directions. The radio operator was the nervous center of communications. He had to maintain contact with other tanks, higher command, and sometimes with infantry units, handling short coded messages while simultaneously firing the machine gun at approaching soldiers. His job demanded multitasking, tuning frequencies on the move, logging messages, sending replies, and responding to the commander's orders. If the radio failed, the crew used a field telephone mounted on the rear of the tank. The radio operator would climb outside, unreel cable, and hook the tank to others. Risky, because he had to expose himself to enemy fire. The Tiger's crew functioned like a small family. A seasoned commander ensured every man felt part of a whole. Trust was essential. Each life depended on the other's reactions. Nicknames, jokes, and rituals arose inside the tank. Crews often gave their machines female names and considered them the sixth member of the team. This family structure wasn't without conflict. Tension built from long hours of waiting, monotonous maintenance, and fear of coming battles. Sometimes the loader felt undervalued because commander and gunner had better situational awareness. In other cases, the radio operator complained he didn't even have time to eat. Humor resolved these contradictions. Crews wrote satirical verses to each other, drew caricatures of their commanders, and parodied orders. Crewmen quickly learned to read each other's moods. One veteran recalled he could tell by the way a comrade shuffled his feet whether he was afraid or angry. That empathy was key to survival. In combat, they often couldn't talk, so they coordinated with glances and gestures. Their common enemies were not only shells, but fear, boredom, and endless waiting for orders. In the following chapters, we'll see how this cohesion manifested during endless hours of maintenance, the waiting for orders, and in combat itself. Next time we'll learn the physical reality of life inside the Tiger, how they fought heat, noise, gasoline fumes, and lack of space. The Tiger was larger than most tanks of its day, but that didn't mean comfort. The interior was crammed with ammunition, tools, radios, fire extinguishers, and personal kit. The wide turret provided more room for gunner and loader, yet rounds had to be stacked along the walls, limiting movement. Up front, driver and radio operator squeezed around the drive shaft tunnel, sat close to fuel tanks, and felt the engine's vibrations. One of the main problems was the lack of space for personal belongings. Each crewman had a small bag with underwear, a razor, a camera, or a book. These had to be stowed so they didn't interfere with handling ammunition. Some soldiers tied them to the ceiling like improvised backpacks. Unsurprisingly, their personal space shrank to a few bins and pockets. The track running gear and powerful engine created endless vibration. Crews learned to sleep and eat in the rhythm of jolts. When the tank rumbled along a broken road, the crew swayed as one block, banged heads against the walls, and tried not to chip teeth on metal fittings. Those with sensitive stomachs suffered nausea. Loaders handed out chewing gum and sweets on long moves to suppress the urge to vomit. Inside the tank, sensory extremes combined. According to articles on tank life, temperatures in summer heat or desert could exceed 38 °C. In Russian winters, the crew battled bitter cold. The steel structure absorbed both heat and cold. When the 700 horsepower Maybach roared, the interior filled with the smell of hot motor oil, gasoline, and cordite. In combat, dust, smoke, and propellant gases added to it. The noise was deafening. The 88mm report resonated inside the metal space like a bell strike. Veteran Wilhelm Fischer said crews had no hearing protection. Each gun or machine gun shot vibrated through them so that after battle their ears rang. The idling engine shook, the gearbox groaned, and interference crackled in the radio. When an enemy shell struck, the whole space shuddered, metal rang, and dust puffed from seams. A constant blend of odors drifted through the tank: sweat, engine fumes, grease, powder, and food heated on improvised burners. According to eyewitness accounts, the tank also carried the smell of urine containers. The crew couldn't leave during battle and had to relieve themselves in bottles or jars. In one veteran's interview, Waldemar Pliska admitted it smelled of gasoline and grease inside. Unlike the infantry, though, tankers had fewer lice problems. Gasoline repelled them. Food aromas mixed into the cocktail. Crews brewed coffee on small spirit stoves, warmed canned rations, and sometimes baked potatoes right on the hot exhaust. When the unit obtained fresh meat, often from horses or slaughtered livestock, they grilled it on camouflage nets laid over the engine deck. This improvised kitchen added a new note to the interior. The sweetish scent of meat mingled with melted petroleum jelly. Hygiene was almost a luxury. Crews washed in stream water or by melting snow, and often only wiped faces quickly with a damp rag. They shaved inside when the engine idled and the lights were dimmed in combat. They had to endure the unpleasant smell that slowly soaked into gear and skin. Space was so tight that every movement required coordination. The loader had to make sure, when handling 25-kilogram rounds, not to knock a comrade or get wedged between shells. Fatigue showed up as back and shoulder pain. Long sitting in heat or cold caused swelling in the legs. Crew life didn't revolve only around battles. Most of the time they spent in cover, in waiting areas, or simply by the tank. According to a report from Daugavpils, crews pitched tents on the riverbank, basked in the sun, wrote letters, and grilled meat taken from stolen livestock. Official rations were supplemented with pilfered geese, chickens, or pork. These were rare moments when they could eat something other than canned food. Veterans recall that in summer they preferred to sleep under the open sky or under the tank to get a break from the gasoline smell. In winter, by contrast, they crowded inside, sat in their seats, and tried to keep warm together. At night, they draped canvas over the engine to retain heat and wore every available layer. Cabin heating was unreliable. In Soviet winters, crews endured temperatures around 50 degrees Celsius. In 1943-1944, some Tigers received heaters, but fire risks often led to them being shut off, so crews devised their own methods: stuffing rags into vents to reduce heat loss, lighting fires outside the tank, and wearing gloves even inside. In severe cold, they shared body heat. Loader and gunner leaned back to back against the turret to warm up. Even resting outside wasn't idyllic. In forests, there was the threat of partisan attacks. In the desert, sandstorms. Crews had to decide whether to risk an attack by sleeping outside or to huddle inside. Sometimes they slept in nearby barns or houses, but often, pressed for time, they stayed with the machine. Veterans describe how in summer they curled up under the tank, listened to crickets, and smelled the sweetish aroma of hot gasoline. Even in wartime, crews found moments for themselves. When tanks sat in reserve for several days, the men spent time caring for weapons, but also played cards, chess, or dominoes. Dice games and Tiger Fible quizzes were popular. The commander read a rhymed prompt, and the others had to supply the correct maneuver. They played for the last cigarette, a piece of chocolate, or a chunk of bread. Small stakes heightened competition and eased stress. Some crewmen brought accordions or harmonicas. In breaks, songs drifted, popular hits or marching tunes. Music helped chase away homesickness. The men also wrote letters. In winter, they sat by candlelight in the armored cabin, composing a few lines to parents, wives, or girlfriends. What they had eaten, where they were, often hiding the horrors around them to spare loved ones. Gifted sketchers drew comrades in the margins of maps or in notebooks, often caricaturing each other. The gunner with huge eyes, the driver dozing in his seat, the radio operator with antennae for ears. These drawings are now valuable evidence of the humor that helped them bear daily hardship. Still, crews often perceived the tank as their home. On long moves, they slept inside or atop the turret, cooked on the heated exhaust, and stowed personal items wherever they fit. Living together in a tight space strengthened cohesion and created rituals, from brewing coffee to exchanging gifts at Christmas. The Tiger was the embodiment of German engineering, reflected in its maintenance complexity. The intricate interleaved running gear was meant to distribute weight better, but cleaning and repairing it took hours. Once mud or ice got between the wheels, they had to be removed, cleaned, and reinstalled. In the Russian campaign, when mud froze in the gaps, the tank became immobile. Maintenance also included daily checks of engine, gearbox, and radiator. Crews had to monitor oil and coolant levels, tighten bolts on the main engine, and adjust valves, often with limited tools, a basic set of wrenches, screwdrivers, and a hammer. Every evening they spent hours removing fenders, clearing mud, and greasing the suspension. Neglecting this could lead to a breakdown at the worst moment. If stones or ice wedged in the road wheels, they had to be pried out with iron hooks. If a track broke, the crew had to attach a spare link, a difficult process requiring a jack and the strength of all men. In cold conditions, they handled tracks in gloves. In heat, the metal burned their palms. Mechanics regularly checked bearings, springs, and rubber tire bands on the wheels. The Maybach engine suffered under strain. Careless driving overheated the transmission and caused oil leaks. Seals cracked, fuel seeped into the engine bay, and fire threatened. Crews were trained to react immediately, opening hatches, using extinguishers, and abandoning the tank if necessary. Mechanical reliability was so low that even well-maintained Tigers were combat-ready only about 40% of the time. To get tanks back into service, heavy tractors or other tanks had to tow them. The enormous mass often required 2 or 3 tow vehicles. There was even a prohibition on towing one Tiger with another, since both could be damaged. The Tiger was a ravenous monster. It burned 2 gallons of gasoline per mile, more off-road. At a time when Germany suffered fuel shortages, tankers had to deliver gasoline over hundreds of kilometers. One Tiger could consume the reserves for several light vehicles. Some units started offensives with adequate fuel, but as the front shifted, tanks began to stop with empty tanks. Each Tiger had 3 fuel tanks totaling over 500 liters. On marches, the driver had to control consumption and regularly switch cocks between tanks so the engine drew from a full one. If a fuel line was damaged in battle, immediate ignition threatened. Crews carried spare rubber hoses and makeshift seals. Fuel supply was a logistical drama. If tankers couldn't break through to the front because of air attacks, crews had to scavenge jerry cans from other vehicles or siphon gasoline from abandoned enemy machines. Some crews reportedly survived only by disconnecting their own fuel lines at night and pouring gasoline into smaller vehicles that then brought supplies forward. On moves, crews had to monitor not only their own consumption, but also the generators that powered radios and recovery gear. Fuel shortages forced crews to abandon and destroy their tanks to keep them from enemy hands. 60 tons also posed demands on infrastructure. Ordinary bridges weren't built for such loads and often sagged or even collapsed under a Tiger. An example is the operation near Daugavpils on the Dvina in July 1944. The tank unit had to wait for bridge reinforcement, while crews sunbathed and herded livestock. Even after crossing, only 8 of the deployed Tigers remained fit for action because dust and heat had caused mechanical failures. Rail transport required special flat cars with reinforced axles. Loading was done by driving up a ramp. Crews removed side skirts to reduce width and chained the tracks down. Each loading and unloading took hours and required coordination with transport regiments. When the front moved quickly, it was sometimes faster to drive on the tank's own tracks and risk wear than to wait for a free car. Bridges were the Tiger's Achilles heel. Engineer units had to build pontoons and floating bridges before attacks to get tanks across rivers, delays that gave the enemy time to organize defenses. When tanks attempted improvised crossings, they had to drive slowly to avoid swaying and collapsing the structure, a nerve-wracking situation under fire from both banks. When a Tiger was damaged or bogged, specialist mechanics and recovery vehicles went to work. The German Army developed the Bergpanther recovery tank, based on the Panther chassis and equipped with a crane and winch. At the front, however, there were too few of these, so crews often had to rely on themselves. If a track snapped, they repaired it in the combat zone. If the tank sank into mud, other Tigers hitched up to pull it free, despite warnings that both machines could be damaged. Repairs were hard, not only because of mass, but also because spare parts were scarce. In the final war years, units cannibalized knocked-out tanks or improvised fixes with a blacksmith's hammer. Drivers learned basic welding to reattach a torn fender or reinforce a cracked bracket. Some regiments had mobile workshops in trucks traveling with the units, rolling up to damaged tanks right after battle. Recovery often happened under fire. Mechanics crawled to the immobilized tanks, hooked chains, ducked behind tracks. Under threat of air attack, they had to work quickly. An abandoned tank was a tempting target for Allied pilots. Many accounts describe crews saving their machines at the last moment, hauling them to the rear for repair. These dangerous operations show how much care the Tiger required and how far men would go to save their tank. The heavy mass also complicated rail transport. During the Eastern Campaign, wagons had to be modified to bear 4 times the usual load. Crews spent more time on maintenance than in combat. Every evening they cleaned the barrel, inspected all tracks and tensioners, checked oil and fuel, greased bearings, and wiped optics. They also tended camouflage, painting seasonal patterns, hanging branches and nets to blend in. Morning procedures included testing radios, checking lubricant and coolant quality, adjusting track tension, and checking brakes. The commander walked around with a checklist, assigned tasks in a notebook, and designated responsibilities. The loader and gunner measured barrel straightness to ensure no droop after previous firing. The driver cleaned periscopes and had to replace any cracked glass. Maintenance was also a social event. While washing and greasing the tank, crews met, exchanged tips and jokes, sang together, or discussed news from home. Even this physical labor helped relieve stress. It gave them a sense of control, if only briefly. In a minute, we'll move into battle. You'll learn what it's like to be locked in an armored cage as dozens of enemy shells hammer down, and what goes through a crew's mind when they have to fight and keep the machine running at the same time. One of the most striking testimonies of Tiger combat is Lieutenant Zabel's 1943 report. His tank took 227 hits during a 6-hour battle, yet managed to destroy enemy positions and travel 60 kilometers. Zabel described the interior. Each impact outside made the hull ring like a gong. The walls trembled. Yellow flashes bounced light around the compartment. Smoke from cracked seals filled the air. Crews lost track of time, forgot hunger and thirst, and performed actions mechanically. Shells damaged machine guns, tore off vision devices, and filled the interior with fumes. At one point, even the engine caught fire, but the crew quickly extinguished it. Concussion and metal splinter injuries were common. Still, the Tiger's strong frontal armor kept it in the fight. Crews emphasized that the greatest weaknesses were the sides and rear. There were many such engagements. On the Eastern Front, heavy tanks were often used as mobile bunkers. Soldiers waited for the order to start engines, crawled into position, fired, and withdrew again, watching the ground carefully because bumps could throw the barrel off target. In winter, blizzards' visibility shrank to tens of meters. Firing was instinctive. The 88s shot cutting white fog like a thunderclap. The greatest pressure came when encirclement threatened. The crew had to be ready to abandon the tank in seconds. Each man had his own emergency exit, but in panic, they could block one another. The commander had to decide whether to order evacuation or stay and try to break out. Many drivers, according to testimony, tried to maneuver even in hopeless situations, overcoming obstacles just to deliver the crew to safety. Allied strategy gradually adapted. American and British tankers trained rose thicket attacks. One group of Shermans lured the Tiger with frontal fire, while another machine slipped to the side to aim at the turret ring. Soviet units combined anti-tank gunfire with infantry assaults. This meant the Tiger had to keep moving constantly to avoid exposing vulnerable angles. In April 1943, the British 48th Royal Tank Regiment got to experience the new weapon at close quarters near Medjez El Bab in Tunisia. Tiger 131 took several anti-tank hits. One jammed the turret, another penetrated the radiator compartment and wounded crewmen. A German unit diary recorded that the crew panicked and abandoned the tank. On-site analysis, however, showed smoke, jammed mechanisms, and injuries were so severe the crew had no choice. Thanks to this, Tiger 131 became the first functional Tiger to fall into British hands. At the Tank Museum in Bovington, it remains the only running example. The incident shows that even a massive Tiger could be put out of action by direct hits, especially if the enemy focused on the sides and rear of the turret. Crews learned to mask weaker areas by keeping the nose toward the enemy and firing from long range. Tiger 131 became a source of priceless information for the British. After capture, it was shipped to the UK, where intelligence specialists examined it in detail. Engine, transmission, gun mount, down to every screw under a magnifying glass. The results helped the Allies understand weaknesses in German design, such as a tendency to overheat or electrical problems. This knowledge then fed into the development of British tank guns and ammunition. In subsequent training, Tiger 131 served as a valuable teaching tool. British tankers sat inside to experience the cramped interior and compare it with their own machines. Although kept in running order, the British realized that relying on a single superweapon would be a mistake. The tanker Otto Carius, in his memoirs, described what it was like to serve in Russia. In 1943, he operated on Lake Ladoga and wrote that the crew lived in 50-degree Oxen without proper winter gear, ate horse meat and frozen bread, and went days without washing. Fleas multiplied inside the tank. Carius said the crew couldn't undress, or they'd be bitten. Despite the extremes, crews tried to maintain morale, playing cards, singing, joking. Carius emphasized the most important crewman was the driver. An experienced driver could prevent mechanical failures, while an inexperienced one could ruin a tank in a few kilometers. When newcomers arrived, veterans taught them gentle shifting and braking, because jolts could damage the gearbox. Beyond the cold, isolation also weighed on crews. In the frozen plains, there were few villages to rest in, so they lived for weeks in the tank's shell. To fight boredom, they kept moving. The driver walked around the tank several times a day to stretch his legs. The loader exercised on the tracks. The gunner reread old newspapers over and over. Some units found old pianos or accordions and organized impromptu open-air concerts. Paradoxically, frost had advantages. Frozen ground could bear the Tiger's weight and reduce the risk of bogging. Crews used frozen rivers as temporary roads. During crossings, they feared the cracking ice and often heard it creak under the tracks. Drivers slowed down, distributed weight, and prayed the ice wouldn't give way. The greatest terror crews faced was the prospect of death. German veteran Waldemar Pliska admitted that in the turret, he felt like he was in a moving coffin, even though the Tiger was considered a safe home. Noise, vibration, and constant tension etched themselves so deeply that long after the war, he woke in a sweat from nightmares of Soviet infantry attacking. These traumas weren't unique to Germans. Allied tankers suffered similar nightmares. Fighting in a closed space left psychological scars that surfaced decades later. At the same time, strong bonds of friendship were born among tankers. Many veterans corresponded long after the conflict. Post-war psychologists found that tankers suffered a particular type of post-traumatic stress disorder. Sensations from the stifling interior and sudden explosions returned as vivid flashbacks. Some former loaders woke at night and automatically reached for a shell. Others covered their ears at any loud sound. Therapy involved rediscovering purpose outside the military hierarchy and accepting that the war was over. Shared trauma, however, strengthened bonds. Many veterans met regularly at reunions to recall hard service and share photographs. Associations of heavy tank battalions arose to preserve the memory of fallen comrades. From these meetings also came many books and memoirs that today help historians reconstruct crew life. Wehrmacht tankers wore a distinctive black uniform with pink piping on the lapels. On the collar stood the Totenkopf, a stylized skull and crossbones. The symbol had been used by Prussian cavalry in the 19th century and was meant to express resolve to fight to the last breath. In the interwar period, it became the emblem of German armored units, and, though associated with SS crimes, Wehrmacht tankers wore it more as a tradition than an ideology. The uniform was designed to allow free movement in the cramped interior. Trousers were cut looser so they could be yanked off quickly in case of fire. Black hid grease and oil stains that soaked into fabric. In the later war years, as supplies ran out, black garments were mixed with standard field gray or even parts of captured uniforms. Crew etiquette included how to wear the uniform. At rest, men wore side caps with the skull badge removed, pinning it back on for battle. Pink piping denoted the armored branch and rank distinctions. Young recruits were proud to wear black. For older veterans, the uniform also symbolized lost friends and long hours in engine heat. Using the skull brought a moral dilemma. After the war, the Totenkopf became a symbol of SS crimes. Wehrmacht tankers argued the emblem came from Prussian tradition, not ideology. Historians today note its meaning is ambivalent, signifying both readiness to die and, for Nazi victims, terror. It shows how important it is to think about symbols in historical context. Tiger crews were recruited from various strata of German society. At first, they were experienced NCOs and officers. Many had fought in Poland and France. As the conflict dragged on, boys who hadn't finished secondary school took the seats. Many were Hitler Youth imbued with Nazi ideology. Others were draftees from the Sudetenland or Austria serving out of obligation. Sociological studies show that despite ideological upbringing, pragmatic bonds formed inside crews. Men had to trust one another regardless of background, politics, or regional identity. Together they shared fear of fire, hunger, sickness, and the joy of a few hours' rest. Crews often included men from big cities and the countryside, Protestants, Catholics, non-believers, and convinced Nazis. These differences blurred in the first days at the front, when everyone had to rely on each other. Even some Mischlinge, men of partial Jewish descent, served in certain units so long as their origins remained hidden. In the tank's tight space, ideological disputes mattered less than the ability to load, drive, or stop an engine fire. Despite cohesion, crews also reflected broader societal conflicts. In some units, fights broke out between older veterans and zealous Hitler youth. Other crews fell apart over personal quarrels, jealousy, or distrust. Historical documents, however, suggest most crews overcame differences, if not for ideals, then for the instinct of self-preservation. In the next section, we'll look at the Tiger's demise, why they became symbols of defeat, and how crews said goodbye to them. By 1944, it was clear Germany could no longer sustain Tiger production. Raw material shortages, factory bombings, and frontline losses meant fewer machines reached the field. The Tiger II, the King Tiger, had stronger armor and a more powerful gun, but it was even heavier and more complex to maintain. Some commanders criticized the choice, arguing it would be more effective to produce more medium Panther tanks. The book, Tiger Tank, notes that while the Tiger II offered a roomier interior with better ventilation that reduced crew fatigue, fuel consumption, and manufacturing costs were even higher. In the war's final year, fuel shortages were acute. Some Tigers were destroyed by their own crews to avoid capture. Others sat in forests with empty tanks because fuel trucks couldn't break through. In the war's last months, the Tiger became a symbolic weapon that could no longer influence the outcome. In January 1945, some units were ordered into a counter-offensive in Hungary, but many tanks broke down before reaching the battlefield. Some commanders blew up their Tigers to deny them to the enemy. Others let them bog in mud and withdrew on foot. This despair shows how deeply the German army was exhausted. Despite improved armor and ventilation, many crews preferred the earlier model. The new tank was heavier, burned even more fuel, and lacked logistical support. In the final battles for Berlin, the Tiger II became a static fortress. Crews parked it on streets and used it as a fixed gun because there wasn't enough gasoline to maneuver. Germany bet on quality and technical perfection, while the Allies bet on mass production. Only about 1,300 Tigers were built, while the Soviets and Americans produced over 110,000 T-34s and M4 Shermans. Though the Tiger had immense firepower, at the front it faced numerical superiority and more reliable machines. This showed in utilization ratios. Each Tiger cost Germany thousands of man-hours and tons of steel, while the Allies could produce dozens of medium tanks in the same time. The contrast was obvious in the statistics. American and British factories turned out tanks by the thousands, while German plants in and around Kassel halted production under bombing. Each Tiger was hand-assembled. The Sherman rolled off automotive-style assembly lines. The Soviets also sent to the front tanks that, while more primitive, were easier to repair and cheaper. German designers tried to compensate for the asymmetry with innovations: infrared night vision, improved sights, cast armor. But these projects came too late. After the war, the Tiger became a legend. Modelers, historians, and filmmakers treated it as the embodiment of invincible German engineering. Myths of its invulnerability persist, though reality was far more complex. No machine is invincible when maintained by people who suffer from fatigue, fear, and shortages. The Tiger's legacy, however, isn't only about technology. It's also about the courage and suffering of crews trying to survive in extreme conditions, about societies that could produce and field thousands of tanks, and about the myth of technological superiority that fed the war's tragedy. After the war, many legends arose. Some Allied veterans admitted the Tiger inspired awe. Its image appeared in comics, films, and toys. In Germany, the name Tiger remained tied to the memory of fallen comrades. Sometimes a cult formed around it that ignored suffering. Historians today call for sobriety. We should appreciate technical innovation while recognizing that behind every tank stood people with their own dreams and fears. Today, the Tiger is a captivating symbol for the public. Every year, Museums in Bovington or Saumur attract thousands of visitors who marvel at the Colossus up close and listen to it rumble during demonstration runs. On social media circulate photos of crews in black uniforms and videos of reenactments. People ask what it felt like inside when everything shook. In this video, we've peered into a world where a technical marvel enforced daily routines, fear, and smell. Realizing that behind thick armor plates sat young men, often barely 20, who struggled with fatigue, frost, heat, and fire, reminds us that in every war, weapons are only tools of people. And what is the Tiger's legacy for the present? It reminds us that regardless of how powerful the weapon, logistics, training, and human morale are decisive. It underscores that investing in superweapons may bring short-term effect, but without mass support and a human-centered approach, they become mere legend. Many young enthusiasts ask whether the Tiger would stand up to modern machines. Historians answer unequivocally. Technological progress can't be stopped, and no weapon is timeless. Yet it's important to study the Tiger's history to understand how technology, logistics, and human factors interrelate. When we see children admiring Tiger models at exhibitions, we should tell them not only about armor and guns, but also about the claustrophobia, cold, and fear its crews endured. This story is instructive for modern armies as well. Weapons projects often arise in response to current threats and political pressure, but in the long term, only those succeed that account for battlefield reality, logistics, and, above all, the people who will operate them. The Tiger's story shows that technology without adequate support has limited effect. When we return to museums and look at these metal monoliths, we should try to see human fates in them. Behind the pinned-on Totenkopf was the face of a farmer, a student, or a laborer called to war. His story matters as much as the numbers in tables. That's why it's important to keep open dialogue and remind ourselves that war is not a game, but a tragic chapter of human history. Thank you for walking with me into the belly of this armored monster and the lives of its crews. If this history interested you, I'd be grateful if you liked the video and shared it with others. By spreading knowledge of history together, we can better understand the present and avoid the mistakes of the past.